My name is Andrew Nusca. I'm the digital editor of Fortune. What that means is I'm the editor of the website. We have a great panel here. We're talking about breaking the barriers to hypergrowth. I will let my panelists introduce themselves. Please name, organization, and maybe like a plain language what you do. No corporate titles if you could, please. Please, Monica.
Oh, hi. I'm Monica Enand, and I'm the CEO and founder of Zapproved. We work with corporations and their litigation departments to help them with litigation response.
I'm Dave Welsh. I'm a member, which means partner at KKR. I'm one of 3 partners on the technology group in KKR North America. Started the growth fund there a couple of years ago. We invest in growth stage companies.
I'm Jeff Richards. I'm a partner with GGV Capital. We're a venture capital firm focused on the US and China. Half the firm is in China, half is in the US. And our current fund is $1.2 billion. We invest in everything from early stage companies to later stage companies.
I'm Jason Maynard. I work at NetSuite. We're part of Oracle now. We're a business unit inside of the Big Red Machine. I run marketing, ISV relationships, our biz dev organization, Bronto, and a couple other things on the side for fun.
For fun.
For fun.
Cool. Thank you very much. So ahead of this session, I was trying to refresh my memory. What exactly is hypergrowth? What was the definition? And the World Economic Forum defines it as a greater than 40% compound annual growth held for longer than a year. So who in this room actually wants hypergrowth for their organization? Raise your hand. Come on, don't be shy. I don't. I'm like, regular growth's enough for me. Okay, who of those of you who raise your hands, who actually is ready, prepared, has built for that hypergrowth? Raise your hand. Okay, I think there were a few less hands. Folks, let's talk about what happened to hypergrowth. I feel like we were talking about it constantly the last couple of years, and then it kind of cooled down. I don't know if that's the conditions changed, the economy certainly changed, the financing environment certainly changed, but why is hypergrowth even possible right now? Any of you?
Okay, you're the entrepreneur.
Of course, of course hypergrowth is possible. How could you say such a thing? I know for a fact it's possible. And in fact, I think it's one of the best times in the world to be looking at hypergrowth because of all of the trends around, especially for software companies and B2B software companies specifically, because of all the trends around the cloud and data shifting, cloud and data volumes growing, and the kind of replacement cycle that needs to happen inside the enterprise. So I couldn't be more bullish about hypergrowth.
All right. Anyone else?
I think, so one of the things that's interesting that we've talked a lot about in our firm is there's what I would sort of think of as a relatively new trend of a lot of the extreme growth companies that are doing really, really well are actually keeping a fairly low profile. So if I look at a couple of the companies that are the most successful companies in our portfolio in the US, you've got an e-commerce business called Wish, you've got a marketplace business called Opendoor, you've got an e-commerce business called House, and those are 3 companies who really don't seek out a lot of press and attention. They're cultivating their business, they're building communities around their business, they're engaging with consumers, but they don't do a ton of media outreach, and I think that's just an interesting dynamic. And so everybody, you're saying, where is the hypergrowth coming from? It's happening, we're seeing it, I'm sure Dave's seeing it in his firm. There are a lot of companies that are doing really well. It's just for some reason we've had a shift where they've sort of decided to keep a lower profile, and I think a little bit of that is to do with the fact that some of the companies that really banged the drum 5 or 6 years ago and attracted a lot of media attention had hypergrowth, and then all of a sudden they didn't. And the backlash of that, cultivating all that media and attention can be pretty challenging.
And you can ask yourself how they even have the time if they're managing hypergrowth. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with Jeff. I mean, I think there is this notion that a few years ago, hypergrowth, almost for hypergrowth's sake, was enough to sort of hang your hat on. And guys, in our industry funded a lot of businesses with a lot of money, based on the notion of we want to see really long-term, sustained much more than a year of sustained, hypergrowth, if you will. And I think there was this note, and you sort of alluded to it, Andrew, that a bunch of businesses really didn't have the foundational elements to kind of sustain that over time. And so I think, besides being under the radar screen, I think there's this other notion that's going on of, let's build hypergrowth if we actually think we can, sustain it and build an organization that can actually, leverage that over time. And let's not do it at any cost. Frankly, people value high growth, but whether you're growing at 50%, 70%, 100%, over a long period of time, at some level, people say if you're growing at some very high, kind of level, it's probably enough. Why don't you build a business that can actually sustain?
Right.
I think one point of this, though, and I'm on the operating side, not on the investing side, and so I would say I think there were a lot of companies in the last, say, 5 or 6 years that thought they were in a category or a market that was actually a hyper-growth category, and there was nothing unique. And so I think some of it is you have to be honest with yourself when you start a company and when you're scaling a company. Is this really going to be a giant category? And not to pick on the venture community, but
you can.
Y'all funded a lot. You guys. There's like Me 2, Me 3. Like we got to Me 6, Me 7. Like everybody had to have an X, right? And you create just way too many shitty companies.
That's our job.
That are not going to be category leaders. I look back at NetSuite, and I had nothing to do with the founding of NetSuite, but when we started in 98, 99, the notion of ERP in the cloud was bananas. Mm-hmm. And when NetSuite went public, and I was on the IPO that took NetSuite public, there were no competitors. I mean, we had Intact, which is kind of a joke. Mm-hmm. We had a couple little, Sage, which was a disaster. SAP was still on-prem. I mean, nobody was trying to do what we were going to do. You look at now, and in your portfolios, there's litany of, Me 6s in each of these categories, which makes these growth statistics in these early stages, I think, totally distorted.
So it sounds like, Monica, to your point, the environment is definitely there. We're ready to go. It sounds like so long as you, if I may, check yourself before you wreck yourself, you're in good shape, right? So what are the barriers, right? This whole session is about barriers to hypergrowth. What is stopping people, companies, founders from getting there?
So I spent a long time on the investing side, and then went into an operating role about 3.5 years ago. And I went into the company, and I had like 1,000 ideas, and I was going to save these guys with all my genius ideas. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, a friend of mine, Chet Kapoor, if you guys know Chet, okay, Apogee, big success. Chet told me, he goes, when you get into NetSuite, he goes, you're going to do one thing for me. And I was like, what am I going to do for you? He goes, you're going to shut up for 90 days. Shut up for 90 days. And after 90 days, you know what my great idea was? We have to stop doing things. Mm-hmm. We're doing too much. We're trying to find every corner case, every little random idea, and you realize if you keep the main thing, you can do a lot better. And I think saying no is a big lesson for hypergrowth. Focus.
Yeah, I think absolutely is right. By the way, I didn't realize you were contributing to all the mayhem that you said is so bad just a few years before you got to. That's good. Yeah. So, throwing the darts afterwards is always fun. But
much easier, man. Much easier.
Exactly. But and I think another one obviously is continuing to have sustained good hiring. I think that bar can get sort of lowered really easily when you're going through hypergrowth, and it's a very competitive market, certainly in the Bay Area, but really across the country for tech talent or tech-related talent. And I think for us, we often see that you sort of trade off, thinking we've got to grow to meet the numbers that we've kind of put in front of us. We see the market opportunity, and therefore, and then you sort of let the process go, right? And those first dozen, even up to 100 people you hire, it's like the people at the top are looking at every single one of them really closely, and then all of a sudden that starts to, it has to at some level. So how do you keep the processes in place to hire great people while you're going through that?
Well, the bigger question is how do you institutionalize to manage hypergrowth, right?
One of the biggest pieces of advice I give entrepreneurs when they're sort of hitting 50, 100, 150 people, and they're in that mode, if you sort of correlate that to a revenue number or whatever in the consumer space, it might be users. A lot of times, and this sort of hits at Jason's point, a lot of times you're in a mode where you're so focused on your business and you're so in the weeds and cranking and stressed and trying to deal with everything else going on in your life, it's really hard to step back and kind of have a 10,000-foot view. And part of our job as investors and board members is to give entrepreneurs that 10,000-foot view, because we do see the other 15 competitors in the space. We're looking at other companies that are interesting comps. And so one of the most valuable things you can do as an entrepreneur is give yourself an independent board member, get yourself a coach, get yourself a mentor, get yourself people that can kind of give you honest feedback on not only the performance of your business, but also the category you're in. Because one of the things you saw happen in the consumer sector, for example, over the last 5 years, everybody got addicted to Facebook as a marketing channel. And every entrepreneur was like, we're killing it on Facebook, we're killing it on Facebook. Meanwhile, Facebook was increasing price, increasing price, increasing price. And by the way, they had 5 other competitors, paying for the same kind of ad units. And all of a sudden in the last 6 months, every entrepreneur came to us and goes, oh my God, Facebook's broken. It's not really working for us as a channel anymore. And,
oh no, it works
And
just
you're
fine.
like, guys, everybody's been telling you that for years. And so it's really hard to discipline yourself as a founder and a CEO to listen to those outside voices. At the same time, you're trying to focus and grow your own company. It's hard. It's really hard. But that's why you see people like, Brian Chesky early on at Airbnb brought in Chip Conley, who was a hotelier, to kind of give him some advice on the industry. And he was smart enough to take that advice and do a lot of things that really cater to their user base. So I think that's an interesting example of somebody who early on realized he didn't know everything. He had a lot of capital and he had a market with a hell of a lot of tailwind, but was also smart enough to bring in people from the outside who could give him good advice.
Because you mentioned the B word, board. How important is
Agreed. No, I think absolutely. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing board. But I would say, in addition to focus, you have to cultivate a board and there's a lot of discipline around doing growth well, because and making sure that it is sustainable, right? And that having a board and mentors, that the actual block and tackle of making sure that you're using all your data effectively, that you're making the right kinds of investments, that you're profitably adding the right kinds of customers, and how much is that taking to do, and investing in the right areas. I mean, by the way, that's not always the sexy stuff to talk about, and it's not always the sexy stuff to spend time on, but having a board and a group of mentors that will actually kind of focus on that block and tackle work with you, I think is really critical.
Yeah, Andrew, to agree. One other thing is sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. So that's something that often is really hard for companies that we work with. You're going really well forward. You see things and you see the big market opportunity, and then suddenly you sort of see these hurdles coming, and you want to just sort of jump over them. And sometimes it means you need to slow down a little bit, maybe build some of the processes and infrastructure, some of the abilities to then have the next level of hypergrowth, if you will. And I think one of the things that happened when there was so much capital in the market was people tried to spend through some of those hurdles. Let's just pour more money on customer acquisition, pour more money on something else, and that actually doesn't usually work very well. That ends up with companies, as Jeff mentioned, that don't end up having good sustained growth. And so we've seen some of our best companies have, they go through these sort of cycles, and you got to be willing to have those and sort of be confident that even slowing down a little bit, you'll still be able to speed back up as things get sort of more stabilized for you.
How do you guys, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
How do you guys look for the
moderated.
signs in these businesses when, maybe not the CEO or the CFO, but it could be them, when you hit those inflection points and then you sort of say, hey, we got to retool part of the team? Because I think that's the one, the crew that got your first 10, 15 customers in a B2B scenario might not be the team that gets your next 100. So how do you sort of coach the leadership team on making those
Yeah,
those
I mean,
spots?
Monica mentioned something you can talk about. I mean, I think a lot of it is become a metric-driven organization, and watch those metrics on a, very good, sustained, longitudinal, time, and sort of see as those metrics start to waver for you a little bit, what are the fundamental pieces there, and then as you start to ask questions, I tend to sense when there's management teams that start just feeling overwhelmed. You're asking them what you think are relatively straightforward questions about, how do you fix these things, and they sort of go to the, I don't know, I can't deal with it. I'm sort of, just so worried about, sort of continuing the sustained growth. And so, I think it's a lot of it is, ultimately results in, delegation ability to, figure out a framework that actually scales and that type of thing. And as you start to see those metrics, come down, rather than saying, I'm going to get around that by putting more money into it or just hiring more people, those are usually some of the earmarks that we see that say, wait a second, we got to slow down here and make sure you're actually putting stuff in the right order.
One of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to entrepreneurs that they rarely listen to is to hire a CFO. Because I would bet, if you think of the average company that we fund is kind of a Series B company at an $80 million valuation, I would bet less than 20% of those have a CFO.
Yeah.
So here's an $80 million company, theoretically, with nobody running the finance organization. And so part of what happens is the entrepreneur doesn't even know the wheels are coming off, right? So they're thinking things are going great. They're doing all those things that work to get from 0 to 5 million. 5 to 15 is starting to happen. But the underlying metrics in the business aren't actually that good, and nobody's really, I mean, I don't understand it because to me, it's such a layup piece of advice. Like, your job as a CEO will be much better if you hire a CFO.
Yeah.
When I started my second company, the first person my co-founder and I hired, we gave him 10% of the company was a CFO. Because I said, I don't want to have to deal with metrics and everything else. I want you to take care of it and help me be successful as a CEO. That is the single, and every founder I've worked with, particularly in software, who has hired a CFO, 90 days later came to me and said, God damn it, I wish I'd done that sooner.
By the way, I mean, and I'll let Monica. So as we invest quite a bit later than Jeff does, obviously, you can definitely tell the companies that had that discipline early versus not when we see them at our stage. So we're investing in companies that may have 30, 40, $100 million in revenue. Even up to that level, you can see companies that didn't invest in that kind of stuff early, and it often starts to show itself as they try to scale, and they don't have, a bunch of, metrics that went back in time and so on.
Yeah, Monica, you're like nodding. Your life is flashing before your eyes.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, guilty. Okay, look, I didn't have a CFO until just a year ago, and I think the part that investors and boards who give that kind of advice could help with is the fact that, like, when you start a company in your living room, you're starting it from the sheer force of will of your human presence, like from every ounce in your body. And no, I can't have metrics around that. Like, I had to basically, there's a whole lot of entrepreneurial gut in the beginning, and there is no way to actually start focus on that. Now, when I get through that phase.
How many people did you have when you hired a CFO?
100.
Yeah,
that's not good.
That's fine. That's fine. You're early.
No,
You're early.
You're doing good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about the time.
I do
50
too.
to 100 people is.
I do too.
He won't be judgy all.
No, and 100 people.
Don't worry,
It's
it'll
all
be okay.
judgy.
But I mean, we've got companies with 250 people with nobody running finance.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Okay, good.
You're great. Gold star.
On the next episode of American
Like
Connect
you want our kudos, right?
No, it's true. There's sort of a change management piece. Whether it's relating to team, by the way, like we create early loyalties and by the way, your early team walks through fire for you, okay? So when you get to that point where, yes, your team is not going to take you to the next journey, a supportive environment with help in the change management, I think would be.
It's hard.
It's extremely
Really
hard.
Really hard.
And so just sort of saying like, I don't understand why they don't take my advice. I think there's, I'm sorry.
I try not to say it
like
that
Sorry. No, I didn't mean that in any way that sounded just now. But I mean, it's hard. And we'll help working through that.
And
So sorry, Andrew.
Go ahead.
Sort of one other thing on building an organization that can scale like this, and we sort of touched on it briefly in the, whatever that is, the blue room. Be willing to have a diverse organization as well. Bring in different opinions, people of different types, different talents. I mean, I will say, father of two women, International Women's Day today. There's such a massive talent out there that's being underexposed right now. So everybody in this room, do your part and actually get there. So.
That's right. You need inclusion across so many different things, right? Viewpoints, backgrounds, and so forth.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. So is there anything else that you would suggest to the illustrious folks in this room to do, right? Get a CFO at a certain limit. Think about change management. Step back, slow down to move fast. I really liked that one.
Good job.
Is there anything else that you would say before we run out of time?
Ask a lot of questions. And find people that have been there and done some of the same things, and be willing to listen to lots of different opinions, some of which will really conflict with each other, and then try to synthesize. I mean, you're not going to get the same view from, thankfully, from everybody you talk to, but hopefully if you listen to a lot of different things, you'll synthesize them into things that will really help you move forward.
I would push, be patient. I think as an entrepreneur, and you highlighted this, it's hard, you're so stressed, you're running around trying to do all these things. But if you kind of take a long view on a 7 to 10 year time horizon, and you think about building your company in that time horizon, you kind of evaluate the progress you're making a little bit differently. And I think we got into a cycle, kind of 14 to 16, where everybody was like, do it all now. And that era of company, a lot of those companies are now struggling. And the companies that took their time are building better companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said this earlier, but I think the main thing is to keep the main thing.
Yeah.
And don't fall out of love with your problem that you're solving, because you probably have lived it, breathed it, have that entrepreneurial gut that you're going to do something great. Mm-hmm. Don't let the other folks sort of pull you and get you into places that you don't need to go. So stay on that path.
Don't let guys like Jason into your office with 1,000 ideas. And then, Monica, do you have any other thoughts?
Oh, I just wanted to echo the comments about an inclusive environment. It really isn't a pipeline problem. There are plenty of available talent there's all kinds of talent out there. I think it's about creating a culture where they're not just hired, but they're retained and progress through the organization. And so I think that's, I mean, how do you hire the quantity of people that we need to hire to fuel our businesses and exclude large swaths of the population? I don't think it's possible given the fact that, the way the world is going.
Couldn't have said it better. Please, a round of applause for our panel.